you get a sense of feel for the attitude of the Russian people about the military operation in Ukraine? I think this is the second time you've been to Russia in the past year. Once was in the winter. It's now, June. It's summer-like weather. You get a sense of their attitude about President Putin, about the war, about where it's going and why it's going on.
I see a lot of, let's call it, happy, busy people strolling along, the main thoroughfare, Nevsky Prospect, and you don't see a lot about the war. It is sort of out of sight, out of mind. I did sit in a local cigar bar yesterday and had a chance to sort of listen to some of the conversation. Most was in Russian and I didn't understand it, but there were discussions about the special military operation and the situation. I think what's taking place is there is a growing resolve in Russia that they're going to end this and end it on their terms. That any desire that they may have had 2.5 years ago to try to placate the West, that's dead. And the West has really crossed or in the process of getting ready to cross some red lines. And that's what's so critical for people in America and Europe to understand. When Russia sets out red lines, they're not kidding. These are not suggestions. These are what they view as life and death issues. And the Russian people have, they have a history of this. I mean, the city I'm in, St. Petersburg, was known as Leningrad during World War II. And when you look at the fact that the Germans encircled the city and tried to starve them out. I mean, Hitler's desire was to kill every Russian inside Leningrad at the time. 800,000 died in about 2.5 years. Most of them died of starvation and disease. Think of that number. That's twice as many Russians died in this one city as a result of a 2.5-year siege as died in the United States in both theaters of war, Pacific and Europe and Africa. Again, this stays with the Russian people. They've paid with their blood for having faced threats in the past from the West. So they don't take the current threats from the United States and Europe about launching missiles into Russia as, oh, no big deal. I mean, I've written this and I challenge every American. Donald Trump recently said what he's going to do is he's going to go cross-border into northern Mexico after the drug cartels. And I understand why he wants to do that, because they're killing over 110,000 Americans a year. However, if Russia then at that point intervened and started supplying missiles to those drug cartels, and those drug cartels were launching those missiles at San Antonio, at Austin, at Phoenix, at Los Angeles or San Diego, do you think we in America would sit back and say, oh, no big deal? Oh, hell no. We would view that as an act of war. So how in the name of God do we have politicians advocating that sort of madness against Russia and expecting that Russia will behave differently than we would? For God's sakes, people, wake up.
Well, Larry, you're, in my view, 100% correct, and I share your passion. But that political advocacy is across the board. It's not just conservative Republicans. I mean, this is right. The war party, the uniparty in Congress. But tell me what you think President Putin thinks of this. This is Secretary Blinken just 2 or 3 days ago on President Biden's authorization for the Ukrainians to use American offensive weaponry inside Russia.
Over the past few weeks, Ukraine came to us and asked for the authorization to use weapons that we're providing to defend against this aggression, including against Russian forces that are massing on the Russian side of the border and then attacking into Ukraine. That went right to the president, and as you've heard, he's approved the use of our weapons for that purpose. Going forward, we'll continue to do what we've been doing, which is, as necessary, adapt and adjust.
How does the Kremlin take that? I'm going to guess you're going to say with the utmost seriousness.
Oh, yeah. Dead ass serious. On a previous visit, I met the number 3 person in the Russian foreign ministry. And he's a very measured, cultured, calm individual. And I saw he made a public comment 2 days ago in response to what Blinken said. And basically made it very clear that Russia is prepared to strike the United States. They're not going to sit back and take this, nor would we. If Russia was doing to us what we're proposing doing to Russia, we would view that as an existential threat. We would view that as a provocation for war. And Americans need to wake up and understand that. This is as serious as it has ever been in the history of U.S. Russian-Soviet relations. We are on the brink of something terrible. And here's the difference. The United States will pay the price. The Russians will not.
What do you mean by that? The United States will pay the price and the Russians will not?
We have lived with this cocoon of security that's called the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. We have never been invaded since the Brits came back in 1812. Or maybe you want to say Pancho Villa riding across the Mexican border into Texas. That's it. Okay? And yet we are vulnerable in ways that Russia is not. Russia has robust air defense systems that can defeat most of our aviation and a significant portion of our intercontinental ballistic missiles. The United States has nothing. Let me emphasize that. Nothing to defeat Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles. If it comes,
most people would say, Larry, the Defense Department has a budget of $886 billion a year and has had numbers in that category since the Bush George W. administration. And now you're saying we have no Iron Dome, no defensive weaponry. Do we have an early warning system? Suppose the Russians aim something at New York. Would it be shot down or would it land?
It would land. I mean, remember 9/11? You know, it took everybody a while to figure out you had 4 hijacked aircraft flying around. But in this case, the Russians have a very capable, robust submarine fleet off the coast of the United States, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific, as well as other means to attack us. They're not playing. They're not viewing this as something that's just inconsequential. What they're witnessing is the United States and Europe, most of Europe, overtly threatening to attack Russia. And, it puts Putin and other political leaders in a position they can't be seen as ignoring that. Because, again, when you look at the history of Russia, they've been invaded at least 4 times overtly and twice covertly. I mean, the war in 1812, the Crimea War in 1854, the World War I, World War II. Then you had the U.S.-backed insurgencies that we tried to spin up in Ukraine from 1949 into the mid-1950s. And then you had the CIA helping provide funding to the Chechen Islamic guerrillas that were fighting the Russians from 1999 to 2009. I mean, at some point, the West has got to take responsibility that we get upset with the idea that Russia was buying Facebook ads to support Donald Trump, which was a lie. But we get really upset about that. And yet we've got this history of funding violence against Russian people. And we think we can get away with it with no consequence. Sorry, the day of no consequence is over. And we are playing with nuclear fire.
Let me ask you to address this from 2 different perspectives. One is European leaders themselves have been threatening Russia. They, of course, have far more to lose. One of the Russian professors. I don't know if you sent this to me or Governor McGregor. Someone sent it to me. Showed this Russian professor saying, if we wanted to, the Polish state and the Polish people would be eradicated in about 35 minutes.
Yeah.
The other layer that is terrifying to me, and this is the direct fault of Blinken and Biden, is there's no diplomacy going on. They don't even talk to each other, the State Department and the Kremlin. I don't think that that was ever the case, even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, even during the war, the coldest parts of the Cold War. Correct me if I'm wrong, Larry. We were talking.
No, you're absolutely right. And again, I heard that from the mouth of this top Soviet diplomat. And as you know, I also addressed the UN Security Council recently, and I spoke directly with the Russian ambassador to the UN Security Council, and they can't believe it. There is no communication, no even kind of civil discourse. The Russians have been open to it. That's the Russians that have been sort of going through this quizzical time of saying, what's wrong with these Americans? And they don't, you know, what it is. And I think I was talking with someone earlier today. She put her finger on it. America is the ultimate now in a narcissistic personality. We see the world only as we want to see it. It revolves all around us. We're the most important thing in the world. Everybody else is of secondary, tertiary importance. If it doesn't benefit us, it's not worthwhile. And as a result of that, we get away with bullying and attacking other countries. The body counts that George W. Bush is responsible for dead Iraqis and dead Afghanis, and then similarly for Barack Obama, that, you know, we're talking hundreds of thousands of civilians dead because of their decisions. You don't have a similar body count by the Russians, by Vladimir Putin. You know, that's just the reality. Vladimir Putin and Russia over the last 30 years have not been invading other countries. The United States has been. And now we were witness to politicians, as you correctly noted, on both Republican and Democrat side, talking about China as our enemy, that we got to fight China, prepare to go to war with China. What, for God's sake, stop. America has got to stop. We are this narcissistic drug user, and we're about ready to try to incinerate the world because of our craziness.
As we speak, organizers are attempting to put together some sort of a, well, Vladimir Zelensky calls it a peace conference in Switzerland. The Russians are not going to show. Of course, they won't deal with him.
Yeah.
As we're on air, Chris just told me that Saudi Arabia announced that if the Russians don't go, they're not going. A, is that significant? Not, we're not going, but if the Russians aren't going, we're not going. B, is this whole conference a fool's errand?
Yes. No, it's a waste of time. It's Zelensky trying to shake down the rest of the world and make the world, you know, speaking of narcissistic jerks. I mean, this little cocaine cowboy, you know, is famous only for how he can play the piano without using his fingers. So he's trying to intimidate and bully the world, but he's no longer even the legitimate president of Ukraine.
Right.
So the BRICS nations, they're coming together. Look, they have differences among them. You know, India and China aren't exactly best buddies. And so it's not to say that they're all in concert, but what they do share is this awakening that all of them are vulnerable to being bullied and attacked by the United States if they remain dependent upon the US dollar. They're recognizing we've got to cut off that dependence. We've got to become independent. We have to act for ourselves. We'll act together. And But, you know, congratulations to Joe Biden and his astute foreign policy team. They have managed to create unity among Brazil, India, China, South Africa, and Russia in a way that has never existed in history. So I guess they get to, retire from office with that as an accomplishment. But it's a reflection of the fact that you've got so many people in the world that are sick and tired of being bullied. And, you know, one of the genre in American film are, you know, whether it's Karate Kid or, this theme where the bully is always out beating up on the smaller person, on the weaker person. And at the end of the movie, the bully gets his comeuppance. It's usually a him, not a her. Well,
Right.
Guess what? The United States is that bully, and we're in the process of getting ready to have our comeuppance because the rest of the world is saying, we're sick and tired of it. We're not going to take it anymore. And we're going to figure out how to separate ourselves. That's why you saw the countries in Sahel and Africa start to kick out U.S. troops. That's why you're seeing a growing people lining up, including Thailand, to say, hey, we want to become a member of BRICS, because they recognize the United States is unstable, untrustworthy, and dangerous.